The mechanical hum of life support machines filled the sterile air of Manhattan's most exclusive private hospital wing. Behind the reinforced glass of room 801, 33-year-old Alexander Hayes lay motionless, his athletic frame reduced to a collection of failing organs and fading vital signs. The tech mogul who had revolutionized artificial intelligence, who had graced the covers of Forbes and Time before turning 30, who commanded boardrooms with the mere arch of an eyebrow. That man was gone. Dr. Patricia Morrison stood beside the bed, her weathered hands clutching a tablet that displayed nothing but deteriorating numbers. She had been a cardiologist for 27 years, had witnessed miracles and tragedies in equal measure, but she had never seen anything quite like this. 3 weeks ago, Alexander Hayes had suffered a massive stroke during a product launch presentation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to advancing human capability through technology, struck down by the very organ that made him human. "There's no brain activity," Dr. Morrison said quietly to the assembled team of specialists. "The EEG has been flat for 48 hours. Every major organ system is failing despite our interventions. His kidneys have shut down, his liver enzymes are through the roof, and his heart." She paused, her professional composure cracking just slightly. "His heart is barely beating on its own, even with maximum pharmaceutical support." The room fell silent except for the rhythmic wheeze of the ventilator. 6 doctors, each a leader in their field, each flown in from around the world at astronomical expense, stood around the bed like mourners at a funeral that hadn't officially begun. They had tried everything: experimental drugs, cutting-edge procedures, treatments so new they hadn't even completed clinical trials. Nothing had worked. "We need to speak with the family," said Dr. Chen, the neurologist who had flown in from Johns Hopkins. "It's time to discuss discontinuing life support." But there was the problem. Alexander Hayes had no family. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 19, the tragedy that had driven him to build his empire with such single-minded intensity. He had never married, never had children, never even maintained close friendships. His entire world had been his company, Hayes Tech, and the revolutionary products that had made him a billionaire before his 30th birthday. The only person listed as his emergency contact was Margaret Chen, his executive assistant of 8 years. She stood in the corner of the room now, her usual composure shattered, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Margaret had been more than an assistant. She had been his gatekeeper, his confidant, the person who knew every detail of his complex life. And now she had to make the impossible decision. How long? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Without the machine's minutes," Dr. Morrison replied gently. "With them, we could keep his body functioning for days, maybe weeks. But Margaret, he's not coming back. The Alexander you knew is already gone." Margaret approached the bed, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She looked down at the man who had been larger than life, who had changed the world, who had worked himself to exhaustion in pursuit of innovation. Even now, pallid and unconscious, connected to a dozen tubes and wires, he looked somehow noble. His strong jawline, his dark hair now slightly longer than he would have ever allowed when conscious, the faint lines around his eyes from too many late nights staring at screens. She reached out and took his hand. It was cool to the touch, not quite cold but certainly not warm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You deserved more than this. You deserved to see what your work would become, to find someone to share your life with, to know joy beyond the next product launch." The machines beeped their indifferent rhythm. Outside the window, New York City continued its frenetic pace, millions of people pursuing their dreams, completely unaware that one of the architects of their modern world was slipping away in this quiet room. "I'll sign the papers," Margaret said finally, her voice steady despite the tears. but not today. Give me today. Let me sit with him one more day. Dr. Morrison nodded. They had learned not to rush these moments. Grief demanded its own timeline. As the doctors filed out, Margaret pulled a chair close to the bed and settled in for her vigil. She thought about the Alexander she had first met 8 years ago, brilliant but abrasive, driven but lonely, capable of incredible innovation but seemingly incapable of simple human connection. She had watched him build an empire, had fielded calls from presidents and tech titans, had scheduled his life down to the minute. But she had also seen the moments when his mask slipped, when the loneliness crept through. "You were always running," she said softly to his still form. "Running from the past, running towards some undefined future. But you never stopped to just be, to live." She squeezed his hand gently. "I hope wherever you are now, you've found peace." The sun began to set over Manhattan, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. The machines continued their vigil, marking time in beeps and pulses, holding back the inevitable with circuits and chemicals. In her apartment across the city, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the hospital, a young woman named Maria Santos was putting her 3-year-old daughter to bed, trying to figure out how she would pay next month's rent now that her cleaning position at Hayes Tech's headquarters had been suspended indefinitely. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, her daughter would become the instrument of a miracle that would defy every law of medicine, every expectation of science, and every logical explanation the brilliant minds at Manhattan's finest hospital could offer. She had no idea that her world and Alexander Hayes's world, separated by billions of dollars and completely different realities, were about to collide in the most unexpected way possible. In room 801, the sun completed its descent, and night settled over the city. Margaret dozed in her chair, still holding Alexander's hand. The machines beeped on. And somewhere in the mysterious space between life and death, something stirred. A consciousness that wasn't quite ready to let go. A spirit that hadn't finished its journey, waiting for a reason to return. Tomorrow, that reason would arrive in the form of a brown-eyed toddler with scraped knees and an inexplicable gift for the impossible. Maria Santos had never expected her life to turn out this way. At 28, she had imagined she might be finishing college, perhaps starting a career, maybe even married to someone who loved her and treated her with respect. Instead, she was a single mother living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Queens, working 3 jobs to keep the lights on and food on the table for her daughter, Isabella. The morning after Dr. Morrison had declared Alexander Hayes effectively dead, Maria stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the eviction notice that had been slipped under her door. 30 days. She had 30 days to come up with 3 months' back rent, or she and Bella would be on the street. Her hands trembled as she read the cold, impersonal text. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. "Mama?" Bella appeared in the doorway, her dark curls tangled from sleep, clutching the worn stuffed rabbit that had been her constant companion since birth. "I'm hungry." Maria quickly folded the notice and forced a smile. "Of course, mi amor. Let's see what we have for breakfast." The refrigerator yielded slim pickings, some eggs, a bit of milk, half a loaf of bread. Maria scrambled the eggs and made toast, giving Bella the larger portion and telling her she had eaten already, which was a lie. Money was so tight that Maria had begun skipping meals, a fact her daughter was too young to notice, but that was beginning to show in Maria's drawn face and the way her work uniform hung a bit looser each week. Bella ate with the unself-conscious joy of a 3-year-old, chattering about the pigeons she had seen on the fire escape and the picture she wanted to draw later. Maria watched her, feeling that familiar mixture of fierce love and desperate fear that had become her constant companion since the day Bella was born. Bella's father, Marco, had disappeared before she was even born. They had been together for 2 years, and Maria had believed his promises of marriage and family. Then she got pregnant, and suddenly Marco remembered he had dreams that didn't include being tied down. He had left for Los Angeles to pursue opportunities, leaving Maria with nothing but an empty bank account and a broken heart. She had tried to track him down once, when Bella was 6 months old, and the bills were piling up. She had found him on social media, living his best life. New girlfriend, new car, posting about club appearances and beach trips. When she messaged him about his daughter, he blocked her. That was the last time Maria had tried to ask anyone for help. She learned to rely only on herself. "Mama, why are you sad?" Bella asked, her brown eyes wide and concerned. Maria hadn't realized tears were sliding down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly. "I'm not sad, baby. Just thinking about grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." But Bella, young as she was, had an uncanny ability to sense her mother's emotions. She climbed down from her chair and wrapped her small arms around Maria's legs. "It's okay, Mama. I love you." Those 4 words broke something open in Maria's chest. She scooped Bella up and held her tight, breathing in the scent of her daughter's shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. This was why she fought. This was why she worked herself to exhaustion. This little person, so full of love and trust, deserved a better life than Maria could currently provide. After breakfast, Maria got them both dressed. She dropped Bella at the overcrowded daycare center that took up most of her paycheck, kissed her goodbye about a dozen times, and headed to her first job of the day, cleaning offices in a medical building in Midtown. It was mindless work, which Maria usually appreciated because it gave her time to think. Today, though, her thoughts were a spiral of anxiety. Where could she and Bella go if they got evicted? The shelters were overcrowded and often dangerous. Maybe she could ask her friend Carmen if they could stay on her couch for a while, but Carmen already had 4 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. As she emptied trash cans and vacuumed carpets, Maria's phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Chen, Mr. Hayes' assistant at Hayes Tech. Maria's heart sank. Hayes Tech had been her best-paying job, cleaning the executive offices 3 nights a week. But since Mr. Hayes' stroke, everything had been chaos. The cleaning schedule had been suspended, and Maria had lost those crucial hours of work. The text read, "Maria, I know this is unusual, but I need your help with something personal. Can you come to Manhattan Presbyterian Hospital today? Room 801. I'll pay you for a full day's work. Please let me know ASAP." Maria stared at the message, confused but also desperate. A full day's pay would at least buy groceries for the week. She texted back, "Yes, what time?" "As soon as possible," came the immediate reply. Maria finished her cleaning shift in record time and called Carmen to see if she could pick up Bella from daycare. Then she took the subway into Manhattan, her stomach churning with nervousness. She had only met Margaret Chen a handful of times, brief encounters in the hallways of Hayes Tech's gleaming headquarters. The woman had always been kind but distant, focused on her endless tasks managing Mr. Hayes' impossible schedule. When Maria arrived at the hospital, she was directed to the 8th floor, to a wing that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Room 801 was at the end of a quiet hallway. She knocked softly, and Margaret opened the door immediately. The executive assistant looked terrible. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Maria, thank you for coming," she said, her voice hoarse. "I know this is strange, but I didn't know who else to call." Maria stepped into the room and stopped short. There, in the hospital bed, was Alexander Hayes. She had seen him exactly twice in person during her time cleaning at Hayes Tech. Both times he had swept past her without acknowledgement, deep in conversation on his phone, moving with the purposeful energy of someone who had too much to do and not enough time to do it. Now he lay completely still, connected to more machines than Maria had ever seen, his face pale and peaceful in a way that looked wrong on someone so young. Is he? Maria couldn't finish the question. Dying, Margaret said bluntly. The doctors say there's no brain activity. They want to take him off life support tomorrow. I signed the papers, but I can't be alone with him tonight. I've been here for 3 days straight, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I need someone else here, someone who won't judge me for falling apart, someone who... She trailed off, then looked directly at Maria. You always seemed kind, and you're not part of this world. I thought maybe you could just sit with me.
Keep me company.
Help me say goodbye. Maria's first instinct was to run. This was too heavy, too intimate, too far outside her job description. But then she looked at Margaret's desperate face, and she thought about the money she needed, and beneath all of that, she felt an unexpected sympathy. Here was a woman who had everything Maria didn't: education, career success, financial security, and yet she was just as alone in her grief as Maria had been when Bella was born. Of course, Maria said softly. I'll stay. They sat together through the afternoon, Margaret telling stories about Alexander Hayes that revealed a more complex person than Maria had imagined. Not just the ruthless billionaire, but a man who worked 18-hour days because he couldn't stand to be alone with his thoughts. A man who remembered every employee's name but couldn't maintain a relationship for longer than a few months. A man who had changed the world with his innovations but had never learned how to simply exist in it. As evening approached, Maria's phone rang. It was Carmen. Maria, I'm so sorry, but my sister went into labor. I have to go to the hospital with her. I can't watch Bella tonight. Maria's heart sank. The daycare had already closed. She had no one else to call. It's okay, Carmen. Thank you for trying. She turned to Margaret, apologetic. I'm so sorry, but I need to go get my daughter. I have no one to watch her tonight. Margaret looked at her for a long moment, then said something that would change everything. Bring her here. What? Bring your daughter here, Margaret repeated. You said you'd stay, and I need you to stay. Bring her. She can sleep on the couch in the corner. I can't be alone tonight. Please. Maria hesitated. Bringing a 3-year-old to a hospital room where a man was dying seemed wrong on every level. But she looked at Margaret's face and saw genuine desperation there. And truthfully, Maria needed the money too badly to refuse. Okay, she said finally. I'll bring her. But if she gets disruptive, we'll have to leave. An hour later, Maria returned with Bella, who was surprisingly quiet, sensing the gravity of the situation even if she didn't understand it. Margaret had ordered dinner for all of them, far more food than Maria had seen in weeks. Bella ate shyly, occasionally glancing at the man in the bed with curious but unafraid eyes. As the night deepened, Bella grew sleepy. Maria made a bed for her on the couch with blankets the nurses provided, but Bella kept fussing. She was in a strange place, and the machines made unfamiliar sounds. Finally, in desperation, Maria asked, What's wrong, mi amor? Bella pointed at the hospital bed. I want to sleep with him. Maria's blood ran cold. No, baby, you can't. He's very sick. But Bella's lower lip trembled, and Maria recognized the signs of an incoming meltdown. Margaret, surprisingly, spoke up. It's okay. The doctors said we could touch him, hold his hand. If it would help her sleep. She looked at the man in the bed, at all the tubes and wires, and something in her expression softened. Maybe it would be nice for him, too, to not be alone. And so, with the nurse's reluctant permission and after carefully arranging all the medical equipment, Maria lifted her daughter onto the hospital bed, tucking her against Alexander Hayes's still form. Bella sighed contentedly, her small hand resting on his chest, and within minutes, she was asleep. Maria sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her daughter's peaceful face, watching the rise and fall of Alexander Hayes's chest kept steady by the ventilator. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights. Inside this room, 3 people from completely different worlds had been brought together by circumstances none of them could have predicted. And as midnight approached, something impossible began to happen. Something the doctors would later be unable to explain, something that would challenge everything they knew about medicine and science, and the boundaries between life and death. It started with a single beep, a change in the heart monitor's rhythm that made Maria's head snap up. Then another. And another. Alexander Hayes's heart rate, which had been artificially maintained at a steady 60 beats per minute, began to rise on its own. 70, 80, 90 beats per minute. The machines began to alarm, and nurses rushed into the room. But they weren't alarms of distress. They were alarms of the impossible. Against every medical prediction, every scientific certainty, Alexander Hayes's body was coming back to life. And curled against his side, sleeping peacefully through the chaos, was a 3-year-old girl who somehow, inexplicably, had called him back from the edge of death. Dr. Patricia Morrison had been asleep for exactly 47 minutes when her phone rang. She was used to emergency calls. They came with the territory of being a cardiac specialist, but something in the nurse's voice made her sit up instantly, her heart pounding. "You need to come to room 801 immediately," the nurse said, her voice tight with something between fear and awe. "It's Alexander Hayes. His vitals are... I don't know how to explain this. You need to see it yourself." Patricia was in her car within 5 minutes, racing through the nearly empty Manhattan streets at 3 in the morning. Her mind spun through possibilities. Had they miscalculated? Had there been some error in their diagnosis? But she had personally reviewed every test, every scan. There had been no brain activity. The man had been effectively dead, kept alive only by machines. People didn't come back from that. When she burst into room 801, she found controlled chaos. 3 nurses surrounded the bed, checking and rechecking equipment, while Margaretchen stood pressed against the wall, her hand over her mouth. And there, in the bed, still connected to all the machines but somehow fundamentally different, was Alexander Hayes. His eyes were still closed, but the monitors told a story that should have been impossible. Heart rate, 95 beats per minute, strong and steady, driven by his own cardiac muscle, not pharmaceutical stimulation. Blood pressure, 128/82, nearly normal. Oxygen saturation, 98%, and rising even as they reduced the ventilator settings. Brain activity, and this was the part that made Patricia's hands shake as she looked at the EEG, brain activity had returned. Not just minimal activity. Not just brainstem function. The EEG showed waves and patterns consistent with deep sleep, the kind of organized neural activity that indicated a functioning brain. A brain that had been declared dead 48 hours ago. "What did you do?" Patricia demanded, her eyes sweeping the room for some explanation. "What changed? Did you administer any medications? Adjust any settings?" "Nothing," the head nurse said firmly. "The only thing different is..." She gestured to the bed, and for the first time, Patricia noticed the small form curled against Alexander Hayes's side. A child. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, with dark curls spread across the pillow, sleeping peacefully with her small hand resting on the patient's chest. And beside the bed, looking terrified, was a young woman in worn jeans and a faded jacket, clearly the child's mother. "I'm so sorry," Maria stammered, moving to scoop Bella up. "I didn't know this would happen." She just wanted to sleep there, and Margaret said it was okay, and I swear we didn't touch any of the equipment. Don't move her, Patricia said sharply. Everyone in the room froze. The doctor approached the bed slowly, her medical mind trying to make sense of what her eyes were seeing. She checked Alexander's pupils with a penlight. They contracted responsively, symmetrically. She tested his reflexes. They were present, appropriate. She spoke his name, and while he didn't wake, there was a subtle change in his EEG pattern that suggested some level of awareness. "This is impossible," she whispered. "But it's happening," Margaret said from the corner. She had moved closer now, her eyes fixed on Alexander's face. "He's coming back, isn't he? He's actually coming back." Patricia wanted to deny it, to say it was too early to tell, to caution against hope. But the evidence was undeniable. The man who had been on the verge of death, who by all rights should have been declared dead, was showing signs of recovery. Remarkable, unprecedented recovery. "How long has the child been in the bed?" Patricia asked. Maria checked her phone with trembling hands. "About 3 hours. She fell asleep around midnight." 3 hours. In 3 hours, Alexander Hayes had gone from effectively brain-dead to showing organized neural activity. The correlation was so clear, it was almost absurd, and yet it violated everything Patricia knew about medicine. Children didn't heal people through touch. That was fairy tale nonsense, not science. And yet, "I want a full neuro workup," Patricia ordered. "MRI, CT, comprehensive blood panel. And I want continuous monitoring. Document everything." She turned to Maria. "I know this is strange, but I need you to keep your daughter here. Don't move her unless absolutely necessary. Something is happening, and until we understand what, I don't want to change any variables." Maria nodded mutely, sinking into the chair beside the bed. Her daughter slept on, completely unaware that she had somehow become the center of a medical mystery that would soon attract attention from around the world. Over the next 6 hours, as dawn broke over Manhattan, Alexander Hayes continued to improve. The ventilator settings were gradually reduced until he was breathing almost entirely on his own. His kidney function showed signs of recovery. His liver enzymes began to normalize. It was as if someone had hit a reset button on his entire system, reversing 3 weeks of catastrophic decline in a matter of hours. Dr. Chun, the neurologist, arrived at 7 a.m. and spent an hour reviewing the overnight data. When he emerged from his analysis, his face was pale. "I can't explain this," he said to Patricia in the hallway outside the room. "The MRI shows reduced swelling, improved blood flow, restoration of tissue that should have been permanently damaged. His brain is healing itself at a rate I've never seen. And the EEG." He shook his head. "He should be waking up soon. Maybe today." "That's impossible. Yesterday you said he'd never wake up." "Yesterday, he was brain dead." Dr. Chen looked through the window into room 801, where the little girl was now awake, sitting quietly next to the unconscious man, drawing pictures on paper the nurses had provided. "Today, apparently, we're in the business of miracles." Inside the room, Bella hummed softly to herself as she drew. She had woken an hour ago, accepted the strange situation with the easy adaptability of young children, and seemed completely content to stay right where she was. When the nurses tried to move her for examinations, she became distressed, and Alexander's vitals immediately became less stable. When she returned to his side, everything normalized again. It was as if some invisible thread connected them, and separating them caused distress to both. Maria sat in the chair, exhausted and overwhelmed. She had called in sick to her other 2 jobs, which she could ill afford to do, but Margaret had promised to compensate her. The executive assistant had left briefly to shower and change, but had returned within 2 hours, unable to stay away. Now she sat on the other side of the bed, watching her boss with red-rimmed eyes that nonetheless held something they hadn't contained in days. Hope. "Tell me about your daughter," Margaret said quietly, breaking the silence. Maria glanced at Bella, who was now singing a Spanish lullaby under her breath, the same one Maria sang to her every night. "She's special."
She always has been.
Even as a baby, she was different. Calm, observant.
People always commented on it.
And she has this way with people, with animals. Things are drawn to her, or she's drawn to them. I don't know how to explain it. Has anything like this ever happened before? Maria hesitated, then nodded slowly. Small things. Nothing like this. But when my neighbor's cat was hit by a car, the vet said it wouldn't survive. Bella sat with it all night, and by morning it was walking around like nothing had happened. And my friend's baby, who wouldn't stop crying for weeks. Colic, the doctor said. Bella touched the baby's hand, and the crying just stopped. The colic never came back. She looked at Margaret, expecting disbelief, but the other woman was listening intently. I thought they were coincidences. Or just good luck. Children are resilient. Animals recover. Babies outgrow colic. But this is different, Margaret finished. They sat in silence for a while, watching Bella, watching Alexander. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, but now it was the sound of life returning, not life support keeping death at bay. At 2:47 p.m., exactly 14 hours and 17 minutes after Bella had first climbed into the bed, Alexander Hayes's eyes opened. The change was so subtle at first that no one noticed. One moment he was still. The next his eyelids fluttered. Then they opened fully, revealing eyes that were clear and aware, if deeply confused. His gaze moved around the room slowly, taking in the medical equipment, the hospital surroundings, the small child sitting beside him. It was Bella who noticed first. She looked up from her drawing, met his eyes, and smiled. "Hi," she said simply, as if greeting an old friend. "You were sleeping for a really long time." Maria jumped up from her chair. "Oh my God. Margaret, he's awake." The room erupted into controlled chaos for the second time in 12 hours. Nurses rushed in. Doctors were paged. Alexander tried to speak, but the ventilator tube was still in place. Dr. Morrison carefully removed it, and he coughed, his voice rough and barely audible when he finally managed to speak. "What happened?" he rasped. "You had a stroke," Patricia said, shining a light in his eyes, checking his responses. "3 weeks ago. You've been unconscious since then. Do you know your name?" "Alexander Hayes." His voice was getting stronger. "My company, the presentation." "That's good," Patricia said, though internally she was reeling. Not only was he awake and aware, but his memory seemed intact. "What's the last thing you remember?" "I was on stage, launching the new AI platform." His brow furrowed. "My head hurt. Then nothing. How long did you say I've been here?" 3 weeks. He absorbed this, his eyes moving around the room again. They settled on Bella, who was watching him with curiosity and no fear. "Who's this?" Before anyone could answer, Bella spoke up. "I'm Bella. I'm 3 years old. I slept with you because you were lonely." A strange expression crossed Alexander's face, surprise, confusion, and something else. Something softer. "Thank you," he said seriously, addressing her as if she were an adult. "That was very kind of you." Over the next several hours, doctors ran every test imaginable. Alexander Hayes was not just alive, he was recovering with impossible speed. His speech was clear, his memory intact, his motor functions returning rapidly. He had some weakness on his left side consistent with stroke damage, but it was minor compared to what it should have been. Dr. Morrison had seen stroke patients with far less brain damage than Alexander had sustained spend months or years in rehabilitation, many never fully recovering. He was sitting up and holding a conversation within 24 hours of waking. "I want to understand what happened," Alexander said to Patricia during one of her examinations. His voice was stronger now, though still rough from disuse. "I was dying. I know I was. I could feel it, even unconscious. I was somewhere else.
Dark. Cold.
And then something changed. Something warm. Something that pulled me back." Patricia glanced at Bella, who had finally consented to sit in a chair instead of the bed, though she refused to leave the room. The child was drawing again, perfectly content, humming her little songs. "We're trying to understand it too," Patricia admitted. "The truth is, Mr. Hayes, by every measure we have, you shouldn't be alive right now. And the only variable we can identify that correlates with your recovery is—" She nodded toward Bella. Alexander looked at the little girl for a long moment. "I don't believe in miracles," he said quietly. "Neither do I," Patricia replied. "But I believe in what I can see and measure. And what I can see is that you're alive when you shouldn't be, and it coincides exactly with when that child was placed in your bed. So whether it's a miracle or some phenomenon we don't yet understand, something happened. Something impossible." That night, as the hospital settled into its quiet evening rhythm, Maria prepared to take Bella home. Margaret had kept her promise, paying her for 2 full days of work, enough to at least buy some time with her landlord. But as they prepared to leave, Bella started to cry. "I don't want to go," she sobbed.
"He needs me."
"He's still sad inside." Alexander, hearing this from his bed, called out weakly, "It's all right. I'm fine now.
"You helped me, Bella.
You can go home." But the little girl was inconsolable, and something in her crying made Alexander's chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with his medical condition. He found himself saying, surprising even himself, "Could they stay? Just for tonight? I'll pay whatever you need. I think she's right. I think I do need something." Maria looked at Margaret, who looked at the doctors, who looked at each other and shrugged. Nothing about this situation was normal anymore. Why not? So Maria and Bella stayed another night. And when Bella climbed back into the hospital bed, curling up carefully next to Alexander, something in the room shifted. The air felt lighter. The machines beeped more gently. And Alexander Hayes, the billionaire who had never let anyone close, who had built walls around his heart as impenetrable as the security around his company, felt those walls begin to crack. As Bella drifted off to sleep, her small hand found his, and he didn't pull away. Instead, he held it gently, feeling its warmth, feeling the steady proof of her pulse against his palm. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Alexander Hayes didn't feel alone. In the chair beside the bed, Maria watched them both, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. Outside the window, the city sparkled with infinite possibility. And in room 801, a billionaire, a maid, and a 3-year-old miracle began to forge an unlikely bond that would change all their lives forever. The impossible had happened, but the real miracle, the one that would matter most in the end, was only just beginning. The medical community's response to Alexander Hayes' recovery was swift and intense. Within 48 hours of his awakening, room 801 had become the most scrutinized hospital room in the country. Specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Stanford descended on Manhattan Presbyterian, all seeking to understand what they were calling the Hayes phenomenon. Medical journals requested papers. News outlets caught wind of the story, though the hospital was doing its best to maintain patient privacy. But amid all the scientific interest and media frenzy, the most profound changes were happening quietly in the moments between the examinations and the tests, in the spaces where three unlikely people were learning how to exist in each other's orbit. Alexander had never been a patient man. His entire life had been built on efficiency, on maximizing every moment, on never wasting a second. But recovery demanded patience. His body, despite its miraculous turnaround, still needed time to heal. The stroke had damaged his motor cortex, leaving his left side weak. Physical therapy was grueling. He could barely walk 10 feet without exhaustion. For someone who had run a technology empire, who had commanded boardrooms and launched products that changed industries, needing help to stand up to use the bathroom was humiliating. "I can do it myself," he snapped at the nurse one morning, his 5th day awake, trying to stand on his own, and immediately losing his balance. "Mr. Hayes, please," the nurse said patiently, catching his arm. "You need to take this slowly." "I don't do slowly," he growled, frustration making his voice sharp. But even as he said it, he felt the weakness in his legs, the way his left foot wouldn't quite obey his commands. His body was betraying him, and he hated it. From the corner of the room, a small voice spoke up. "My mama says when you're frustrated, you should take big breaths. Like this." Bella demonstrated, her little chest expanding dramatically as she inhaled, then letting the air out with an exaggerated whoosh.
"See?
"Now you're less grumpy." Alexander looked at her, this tiny human who had appointed herself his unofficial guardian, who refused to leave the hospital even though surely she had better things to do than watch him struggle with basic motor functions. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, surrounded by the crayons and coloring books Margaret had bought for her, completely at ease in a situation that should have been frightening for a 3-year-old. Despite himself, Alexander felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "I'm not grumpy," he said. "Yes, you are," Bella replied matter-of-factly. "But it's okay. Mama gets grumpy too when things are hard. Then we have chocolate and it's better." The nurse, fighting back a smile, helped Alexander back to bed. Once he was settled, Bella climbed down from the couch and approached him, holding out a piece of chocolate from the stash Margaret had brought.
"Here," she said.
"For being brave." Alexander took the chocolate, an expensive artisan truffle that probably cost more than most people spend on lunch, and for the first time since waking up, he felt something other than frustration or fear. He felt touched. This child, who barely knew him, who had no reason to care about his recovery, was offering him comfort in the only way she knew how. "Thank you," he said softly, and he meant it. Maria watched this exchange from the doorway, where she had been standing with a cup of coffee. She had been here for 5 days now, sleeping in the chair or on the couch, leaving only to shower at a friend's apartment nearby. Margaret had arranged for Carmen to watch Bella during the days when Maria needed to sleep, but Bella always came back, always insisted on being here. And Maria, despite her discomfort with the situation, couldn't deny that something extraordinary was happening. She had seen Alexander Hayes on the news, in magazines, always so polished and confident and untouchable. The man in the hospital bed was different. Vulnerable, frustrated, struggling, human. And Bella, with the uncanny intuition of small children, seemed to understand exactly what he needed. Not pity, not coddling, but simple kindness offered without expectation. "She's good for him," Margaret said, appearing beside Maria. The executive assistant had barely left either, managing Alexander's company remotely from the hospital, fielding endless calls and emails. "I've worked for Alexander for 8 years. I've never seen him let anyone this close." "She's 3, Maria said. "She doesn't understand boundaries." Maybe that's exactly what he needs. Over the following days, a routine developed. Bella would arrive in the morning, usually with a new drawing she had made for Alexander. He pretended to be indifferent at first, but Maria noticed he kept every single one, instructing Margaret to pin them on the wall where he could see them. During his physical therapy sessions, Bella would sit on the floor nearby, chattering about her day, about the birds she saw from the window, about the stories Maria read her at night. The therapists noticed that Alexander pushed himself harder when Bella was watching, as if he didn't want to appear weak in front of her. In the afternoons, when Alexander needed to rest, Bella would climb into the bed beside him. The doctors had given up trying to prevent this. Alexander's vitals were measurably better when she was close, his stress markers lower, his recovery faster. It defied medical explanation, but the data was undeniable. During these quiet hours, something unexpected happened. Alexander and Bella began to talk. Real conversations, as real as one could have with a 3-year-old. Bella told him about her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, and how he liked carrots, but not the orange kind. Alexander told her about the technology his company made, explaining artificial intelligence in terms she could understand. Computers that learn how to think, like how you're learning your ABCs. But computers don't have hearts, Bella observed. No, they don't. That's why they can't love people. Only people can love people.
And dogs.
Dogs can love too. Alexander found himself pondering this simple statement long after Bella fell asleep. He had spent his entire adult life working with artificial intelligence, trying to make machines that could think, that could solve problems, that could perhaps even surpass human capability. But Bella was right. He had never tried to give them hearts. He had never even thought about it because he had spent so little time considering his own heart. One afternoon, about a week into his recovery, Alexander asked Maria a question that had been bothering him. Bella was napping, curled against his side, and Maria was reading a book Margaret had lent her. "Why do you let her stay here?" he asked. "You must have things to do. Places to be." Maria looked up from her book, surprised. It was one of the first times Alexander had addressed her directly. "Margaret is paying me," she said simply. "We needed the money. But it's more than that. You could take the money and leave. Send her with a babysitter. But you stay too." "Why?" Maria was quiet for a moment, considering. "Bella wouldn't understand if I left." And she hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than evasion. "You were dying. Then you weren't. I don't understand what happened, but I know my daughter had something to do with it. I'm her mother. I need to be here to protect her if there are consequences I don't understand yet." Alexander absorbed this. "You're scared. Wouldn't you be? If your child could somehow bring people back from death? What does that mean? Is she okay? Is it hurting her? I don't know, and the doctors don't know. And yes, I'm terrified." It was the most vulnerable thing she had said, and Alexander recognized the courage it took to admit fear. He looked down at Bella's sleeping face, peaceful and innocent, completely unaware of the mystery she represented. "She seems happy," he offered. "She does," Maria admitted. "She likes you. I don't know why you're not exactly warm and fuzzy." Alexander almost smiled. "No, I'm not. But she sees something in you. Something good. Children are intuitive about these things. Or she just likes the chocolate." This time Maria did smile. That too. From that conversation, a tentative friendship began to form. Maria started joining Alexander and Bella during their afternoon talks. She would tell stories from her childhood in the Dominican Republic, about her grandmother who raised her, about the beach near her village, and the mangoes that grew wild. Alexander would listen, fascinated by this life so different from his own privileged upbringing. He found himself sharing things too, about his parents' death, about the loneliness of building an empire, about the nights when success felt hollow because there was no one to share it with. "Why didn't you ever marry?" Maria asked one evening, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry. That's none of my business." But Alexander answered, I never had time. That's what I told myself anyway. The truth is probably that I never learned how to let someone in. My parents died when I was 19, right when I was supposed to be learning how to be an adult. I threw myself into work because grief was too hard. And after a while, work was all I knew. Maria understood that kind of grief, the kind that reshaped your entire life. My daughter's father left before she was born, she said quietly. I thought I knew him, thought we would build a life together. But when it got hard, when real responsibility showed up, he ran. I promised myself I'd never need anyone that much again. Has it worked? Alexander asked. Not needing anyone? Maria looked at Bella, still sleeping peacefully between them. Not even a little bit, she admitted. I need her more than I've ever needed anything. And that's terrifying in a completely different way. They sat in comfortable silence after that, both lost in thought, both recognizing something of themselves in the other. Two people from completely different worlds, brought together by circumstance and a small child with an inexplicable gift. As Alexander's recovery progressed, he began to take an interest in Maria and Bella's life beyond the hospital. He learned that Maria worked 3 jobs, that she was facing eviction, that she had dreams of going back to school someday but couldn't imagine how to make it happen. The practical part of his brain, the part that solved problems and built solutions, immediately began working on ways to help. But another part of him, a part he was only beginning to recognize, hesitated. He didn't want to offend her, didn't want her to think he saw her as a charity case. It was Margaret who finally broached the subject. You need to hire them, she said bluntly one day when Maria and Bella had left for the evening. Hire them for what? Alexander asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. Alexander, you're going to need help when you leave the hospital. Full-time care, at least for a few months. Physical therapy, help with daily activities. And we both know you won't accept it from just anyone. But Bella, she helps you. We can see it, the doctors can see it. And Maria needs stable work. It's logical. It's not logical at all, Alexander countered. She's not a trained nurse. She cleans offices. She's a mother who keeps a 3-year-old alive and happy while working 3 jobs and facing eviction. I'd say that makes her more qualified than most people to handle complex logistics and challenging situations. Plus, Bella trusts her, and you trust Bella. Alexander couldn't argue with that logic, much as he wanted to. The truth was, the thought of leaving the hospital terrified him. Not because of his physical limitations, those he could handle, but because leaving meant leaving this strange little bubble where Bella visited every day, where Maria's quiet presence had become something he looked forward to, where he felt less alone than he had in years. I'll think about it, he said. But Margaret knew him well enough to recognize that as agreement. The next day, Alexander waited until Bella was occupied with her coloring to speak with Maria. I have a proposal, he began, his voice carrying the same tone he used in boardroom negotiations, though his palms were inexplicably sweaty. Maria looked up from the magazine she'd been reading. Okay. I'm going to be discharged in about a week. The doctors say I'll need full-time assistance for several months, help with physical therapy, daily activities, that sort of thing. I'd like to hire you for the position. Maria blinked. I'm not a nurse. I have nurses. What I need is... He paused, struggling to articulate something he barely understood himself. I need Bella. And I need someone I trust to manage the household, to coordinate care. He trailed off, realizing how this sounded. I'm explaining this poorly. Let me be direct. You need stable employment and housing. I need help, and your daughter seems to provide some kind of therapeutic benefit that the medical community is baffled by. It would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. You and Bella would live in my home. You'd have your own wing, complete privacy. Your job would be to coordinate my care, manage the household staff, And yes, let Bella visit with me regularly. The salary would be $150,000 a year, plus full benefits, plus I'd cover Bella's childcare and education. Maria's magazine slipped from her fingers. $150,000? It's actually below market rate for a household manager in Manhattan, but we can negotiate if. That's more than I make in 5 years, Maria interrupted, her voice faint. Alexander suddenly realized how enormous the gap between their worlds really was. What seemed like a reasonable salary to him was an impossible fortune to her. It's what the position is worth, he said quietly. But I understand if you need time to think about it. Maria looked at Bella, happily coloring, then back at Alexander. Why are you doing this? Really? He met her eyes, and for once he was completely honest. Because I was dead, and your daughter brought me back. Because for the first time in my adult life, I don't feel alone when I'm in this room. Because you're kind without expecting anything in return, and I've learned that's rare. Because maybe I'm tired of living in that glass tower by myself. He paused. And because I can help you, and it feels like I should. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. She had been so alone for so long, fighting so hard, never asking for help because she had learned that help never came. And here was this man, this billionaire who by all rights should be completely disconnected from her reality, offering her a lifeline not out of pity, but out of what seemed like genuine need. Can I think about it? She asked. Not about the money. The money would change our lives. But living with you, that's complicated. I need to think about what's best for Bella. Of course, Alexander said. Take all the time you need. But that night, as Maria lay on the uncomfortable hospital couch, listening to Bella's soft breathing and Alexander's steady heartbeat on the monitors, she already knew what her answer would be. Sometimes life offered you a door you never expected, and you could either walk through it or spend the rest of your life wondering what was on the other side. She chose to walk through. 3 days later, when Alexander was officially cleared for discharge, Maria stood beside his bed with Bella's hand in hers. We'll do it, she said. We'll come live with you. But I have conditions. Alexander, who was used to being the one making conditions, found himself intrigued. Go on. Bella's routine stays consistent. Same bedtime, same rules, same structure. She's 3. She needs stability. Second, I'm her mother first, your employee second. If I feel like any of this is bad for her, we leave. No questions asked. Third, we have our own space. I'm not a live-in girlfriend or whatever the gossip sites might speculate. This is a professional arrangement that happens to include residential requirements. Agreed, Alexander said immediately. Anything else? Maria hesitated, then said, just be good to her. She cares about you. I can see it. And if you hurt her, I won't, Alexander interrupted, and he meant it with a certainty that surprised him. Maria, I promise you, I won't hurt her. And as Bella cheered, excited about the big new house they were moving to, neither Maria nor Alexander could have known that this promise would be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, that the bond forming between this unlikely trio would face challenges that would require every ounce of strength they possessed. But they would face those challenges together, this billionaire, this maid, and this miracle of a child. The healing had only just begun. The real test was still to come. Alexander Hayes's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Tribeca, a testament to wealth so profound it was almost abstract. Maria stood in the marble-floored foyer with Bella's hand clutched in hers, their combined possessions fitting into 3 battered suitcases, and felt the gulf between her world and Alexander's yawn wider than the Grand Canyon. Holy! Maria stopped herself, remembering Bella's presence. This is where you live. Alexander, still moving carefully with a cane, managed a slight smile. It's home. Or it has been. I'm realizing now it's more like a very expensive hotel room where I occasionally sleep between meetings. He gestured to the sprawling space, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, artwork Maria recognized from museum visits she couldn't afford, furniture that looked too perfect to actually sit on. Your wing is this way. He led them down a hallway to a section of the penthouse Maria assumed was designed for staff quarters, though calling them quarters was like calling the Pacific Ocean a puddle. There was a master bedroom with an ensuite bathroom larger than Maria's entire old apartment, a second bedroom clearly set up as a child's room, Margaret's doing Maria suspected, and a sitting area with its own kitchenette. Margaret took the liberty of furnishing Bella's room, Alexander said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. If it's not appropriate, we can change everything. Bella had already broken free of Maria's hand and was exploring her new room with wide-eyed wonder. The walls were painted a soft lavender. There was a bed shaped like a castle, shelves full of books and toys, and a window seat overlooking the city. "Mama," she squealed. "It's like a princess room." Maria felt overwhelmed. This was too much. All of it was too much. She turned to Alexander, intending to say something about scaling back, about how Bella didn't need all this, but the words died on her lips when she saw his expression. He looked nervous, uncertain, hopeful. This powerful man who commanded empires was anxiously waiting to see if a 3-year-old approved of her bedroom. "It's perfect," Maria said softly. "Thank you." The relief on his face was almost comical. The first week in the penthouse was an exercise in adjustment for everyone. Maria had expected her role to be clear-cut, managing Alexander's care, coordinating with his physical therapist and doctors, ensuring his recovery stayed on track. What she hadn't anticipated was how blurred the lines would become. Alexander's physical therapy sessions were grueling. His therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Diana, put him through exercises that left him sweating and frustrated, pushing him to regain strength and mobility in his weakened left side. Maria's job was technically just to coordinate the schedule, but she found herself present for the sessions, offering quiet encouragement, bringing water, helping him up when his pride wouldn't let Diana do it. "You're doing better," Maria said one afternoon after a particularly difficult session. Alexander was slumped on the couch, exhausted, while Diana packed up her equipment. "I can barely walk without this damn cane," he muttered. 3 weeks ago, you were in a coma. Now you're walking. That's not barely anything. That's miraculous." He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You're very optimistic for someone who's had a hard life." "Hard lives teach you to appreciate small victories," Maria replied. "You should try it sometime." Despite his frustration with his physical limitations, Alexander threw himself into work with characteristic intensity. He couldn't return to the office yet, but he could work from home, which he did with a fervor that alarmed everyone around him. He took video calls from his study, reviewed product developments, made decisions about company direction. Maria would find him at his desk at midnight, still working, his face pale with exhaustion. "You need to rest," she said, appearing in his study doorway with a cup of tea. She had learned he preferred Earl Grey, though he pretended not to care what he drank. "I'm fine," he said automatically, not looking up from his screen. "You're not fine. You're recovering from a stroke. Your body needs sleep. My company needs me." Maria set the tea on his desk with more force than necessary. "Your company has hundreds of capable people. It survived 3 weeks without you. It can survive you sleeping 8 hours. Alexander finally looked up, ready to argue, but the concern in her eyes stopped him. When was the last time anyone had cared whether he slept? "Old habits," he said instead. "Well, develop new ones. Bella needs you functional. I need you functional. And despite what you might think, you need yourself functional." He found himself smiling despite his exhaustion. "You're very bossy for an employee. You're very stubborn for a genius. We're even." These small moments of friction and understanding began to build a foundation neither of them quite recognized. Maria learned that Alexander took his coffee black, that he hated mornings, that he played piano beautifully when he thought no one was listening. Alexander learned that Maria sang in Spanish when she cooked, that she read Bella the same 3 books every night in exact rotation, that she cried quietly in the shower when she thought she was alone but never let Bella see her worry. But it was Bella who truly transformed the penthouse from a cold showcase into something resembling a home. She brought noise and chaos and joy into spaces that had known only silence. She left her drawings on Alexander's desk, her toys scattered across his formerly pristine living room, her laughter echoing through hallways that had never heard a child's voice. Alexander, who had never spent significant time around children, found himself adapting in ways that surprised him. When Bella insisted on helping him walk, he held her hand and let her believe she was supporting him, even though she barely reached his hip. When she demanded he attend her tea parties with her stuffed animals, he sat on the floor despite his therapist's warnings about his mobility and solemnly discussed the weather with Mr. Hoppy. When she crawled into his lap during his video conferences, he didn't push her away. He simply continued his meetings with a 3-year-old occasionally whispering questions in his ear. His board members were baffled. His competitors were confused. But Margaret, watching from the sidelines, just smiled. She was seeing something she'd never witnessed in 8 years. Alexander Hayes learning how to be human. One evening, about 3 weeks into their new living arrangement, Maria was cooking dinner while Bella helped Alexander with what she called his homework, the exercises Diana had left for him to practice between sessions. Maria could hear them from the kitchen, Bella counting repetitions in her high, clear voice, Alexander grunting with effort but also laughing at her increasingly silly numbers. 14, 15, 16 elephant. Elephant isn't a number, Bella. It is now. Elephant, giraffe, butterfly. Maria smiled, stirring the rice. This wasn't how she had imagined her life would turn out. 6 weeks ago, she had been facing eviction, working herself to exhaustion, seeing no way forward. Now she was living in a penthouse, earning more money than she had dreamed possible, watching her daughter forge an unlikely bond with one of the world's wealthiest men. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt like charity, like she was taking advantage, like this arrangement was somehow inappropriate. But it didn't feel like any of those things. It felt like they were all finding something they hadn't known they needed. Mama, dinner? Bella called, and Maria brought the food to the dining table, a massive thing that could seat 20, but now held 3 place settings, always positioned close together at one end, because eating at opposite ends felt ridiculous. As they ate, Bella chattered about her day at the new preschool Alexander had enrolled her in, a prestigious Montessori program that Maria never could have afforded. Alexander listened attentively, asking questions, genuinely interested in the politics of the 3-year-old classroom. And then Sophie said her dad has a boat, but I said my friend Alex has a big tall building, and that's better than a boat because boats can sink but buildings stay up. Your friend Alex? Alexander repeated, amused. That's you, Bella said, as if this should be obvious. You're my friend. Maria watched Alexander's face transform, a softness entering his eyes that she had never seen in the boardroom footage Margaret sometimes showed her, had never seen in the magazine profiles. I am your friend, he agreed quietly. And you're right. Buildings are better than boats. After dinner, during Bella's bath time, Maria found Alexander in the living room, staring out at the city lights. She almost left him alone. He looked like he was deep in thought, but something in his posture made her stop. You okay? She asked. I'm thinking about before, he said without turning around. Before the stroke. I worked 16, 18-hour days. I couldn't tell you the last time I had an actual conversation with someone that wasn't about business. I slept 4 hours a night and was proud of it. I thought that was success. That was what winning looked like. He finally turned to face her. I was so stupid. You were driven. There's a difference. Is there? I was 33 years old, and I had built a billion-dollar company, but I couldn't name a single person who would miss me if I died. Not really miss me. Miss my contributions, miss my leadership, but not me.
He paused.
And then I did almost die. And a 3-year-old I'd never met brought me back.
Why?
What did I do to deserve that second chance? Maria crossed the room to stand beside him. Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe Bella just saw something in you worth saving. What could she possibly see? She doesn't know anything about my company, my accomplishments. Exactly, Maria interrupted. She doesn't see the billionaire or the CEO or the genius inventor. She sees Alex, her friend who needs help walking sometimes and makes funny faces when he's frustrated and listens to her stories about preschool politics like they matter. That's what she saved. And maybe that's who you were supposed to be all along. Alexander absorbed this, feeling something shift in his chest. I don't know how to be that person. None of us know how to be who we're supposed to be, Maria said gently. We just try every day to be a little better than we were yesterday. And you're already doing that. I see it. Do you? His voice was vulnerable in a way she'd never heard. I see you, Alexander. Not the headlines or the fortune. I see someone who's trying to figure out what life means when all the metrics of success stop making sense. Someone who's learning that being alive is about more than just not being dead. She smiled slightly. Plus, you make my daughter laugh. That counts for a lot. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe below them. And Maria realized with a start that she wasn't just comfortable in this space anymore. She belonged here. Not because of the luxury or the money, but because this was where Bella was happy, where she herself was finding a purpose beyond survival, where a broken man was learning how to heal. The following weeks brought a rhythm to their lives. Alexander's recovery progressed steadily. He graduated from a cane to just a slight limp, regained most of his motor function, even started playing piano again in the evenings. His company announced his return to partial duties, carefully managed by Margaret to ensure he didn't overwork himself. But the biggest changes were the ones that couldn't be measured in medical charts or business metrics. Alexander started coming home for dinner instead of eating at his desk. He joined Bella for her nightly bath routine, reading her stories in different silly voices that made her shriek with laughter. He taught her basic coding concepts with games and puzzles, delighted when she grasped them immediately. He even attended a preschool parent event, enduring the stares and whispers about why a billionaire was acting as guardian to the housekeeper's daughter. Let them talk, he said to Maria afterward. They don't understand. Do you understand? She asked.
He thought about it.
I'm beginning to. For Maria, the transformation was equally profound. With financial security for the first time in her adult life, she began to dream again. She enrolled in online courses, working toward the college degree she'd abandoned when she got pregnant. Alexander quietly paid her tuition, brushing off her protests with a gruff, "It's a business expense. I need a smart household manager." She also began to let her guard down, to trust that this situation was real and stable. She laughed more freely, worried less constantly, allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving until tomorrow. And she found herself looking forward to the evenings when they all sat together, 3 people from impossible different worlds, somehow forming something that looked a lot like a family. One Saturday afternoon, Margaret stopped by with some documents for Alexander to review. She found him on the living room floor with Bella, building an elaborate structure out of blocks while Maria read on the couch nearby, her feet tucked under her, completely at ease. "I'll come back later," Margaret said, smiling. "No, stay," Alexander insisted. "We're just finishing the tower. Bella's the architect. I'm just the construction crew." Margaret sat on the arm of the couch next to Maria, watching Alexander take instructions from a 3-year-old with complete seriousness. "I've never seen him like this," she said quietly. "In 8 years, I've never seen him this present." "Dying changes people," Maria replied. "No," Margaret shook her head. "Dying didn't change him. Coming back did. Coming back to this, to both of you, That's what changed him. Maria looked at Alexander, really looked at him, and saw what Margaret meant. The harsh lines around his eyes had softened. He smiled more readily, laughed more often. He moved through the world differently now, less like he was conquering it, and more like he was learning to appreciate it. "He's lucky to have found you," Margaret added. "I think we're lucky to have found each other," Maria corrected.
And she meant it.
That night, after Bella was asleep, Maria found Alexander in his study, but for once he wasn't working. He was looking at the drawings Bella had made, all pinned up on a corkboard Margaret had installed, a splash of childish color in his previously austere workspace. "She made you a new one today," Maria said, handing him a crayon masterpiece that appeared to be 3 stick figures holding hands. "She said it's her family." Alexander studied the drawing, one tall figure, one medium figure, one tiny figure, all with huge smiling faces. "Her family," he repeated softly. "She counts you in that," Maria said. "I hope that's okay. I can talk to her about the difference between family and friends if you're uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," Alexander interrupted, still looking at the drawing. "I'm honored. Terrified, but honored." "Why terrified?" He set the drawing down carefully. "Because I don't know how to be family. I don't have a manual for this. What if I mess it up? What if I let her down?" Maria sat on the edge of his desk. "You will mess it up. Everyone messes it up. That's not the question. The question is whether you'll show up anyway, whether you'll try anyway, whether you'll love her anyway. And I think you already know the answer to that." "Do I?" But even as he asked it, he knew. Somewhere in the past weeks, this little girl had worked her way into his heart as surely as she had worked her way into his hospital bed. He would protect her, support her, be there for her, whatever that meant. He didn't know how to be a father, had never planned to be one, but he knew how to be Bella's Alex. And maybe that was enough. "You do," Maria confirmed. "I see it every day." They looked at each other across the desk, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, not just between Alexander and Bella, but between all 3 of them. A recognition that this arrangement, which had started as a practical solution to mutual problems, had become something deeper, more meaningful, more permanent. Neither was quite ready to name it, but both felt it, as surely as the pulse of the city below, as surely as Bella's steady breathing in her castle bed down the hall. They were becoming a family, these 3 unlikely souls, bound together by circumstances neither science nor reason could fully explain. The healing was nearly complete. But the real journey, the journey of learning to live, to trust, to love, was only just beginning. And in the penthouse overlooking the city that never sleeps, 3 people who had all been lost in different ways had finally found their way home.